And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Merry Christmas. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather outlook that'll take us through Christmas Day. Looking at the sea ice edge, boy, it's expanding southwestward. We have winds, north-northeast winds, and very cold air here, especially out over the western and southwest interiors, well below zero. So this ice development will continue. We see the ice also expanding here down across Bristol Bay. But I also wanted to just thank everybody yesterday. We had a massive internet outage that really impacted our operations, and thank you for your understanding and patience. It's good to be back again. We have another storm coming up here, not as strong as the one that just happened in the Gulf, but respectable enough. The low will be lifting out of the North Pacific and heading back up toward the North Central Gulf later Christmas Day into Tuesday. So by the time we get into late tonight, early Christmas Day, we have a frontal system pushing up into the southern panhandle. This is going to still have some strong gusty winds. Some wind gusts could be up over 50 miles an hour with this front. I mentioned in the public weather segment that areas like Ketchikan and Metlakatla had wind gusts over 60 miles an hour, but there was an 85 mile an hour wind gust at Heidelberg with the most recent storm. And this low will take a track back up toward the north and west, and by Christmas Day afternoon, it'll be located west-southwest of the Panhandle coastline, and there'll be rain falling along much of the southern and up through the middle portion of the Panhandle, but the far north, especially up there towards Skagway, Haines, and along the higher elevations of the highways there to the Canadian border, that is where the heaviest snow will fall with that system on Christmas Day. As much as 20 inches of snow could fall up toward the customs checkpoint. Back across the interior, weak high pressure, but it's allowing for clearer skies and very cold conditions to set up across this part of the mainland. Meanwhile, we just kind of have some low pressure systems hanging out here that consolidate into more of a low over the central bearing by Tuesday afternoon, with one scooting up here toward the western Kenai. But otherwise, we're not anticipating systems to be quite as strong as what they were leading up to Christmas. And the low that does come into the Gulf will weaken here as it heads up here toward the northern portion of the Gulf up into the southeast mainland. So look at these winds, though. We still have high-end gale force winds with some storm force gusts possible on Monday as that frontal system works its way up into the southwest portion of the Panhandle. Gusts as high as 60 knots off of Craig and Sitka could produce waves as high over 30 feet, let's just say. For the inner channels, we're looking at southeast winds to 40 knots, 22-foot waves there, Dixon Entrance there outside of Metlakatla. Middle channel, Stevens Passage, north winds gust 40 knots, 6-foot waves, 5-foot waves within Lynn Canal. Same thing, north winds could gust as high as 40 knots. And then Tuesday, things do settle down a bit because the low will have already lifted to the north and west. We expect winds to go southeasterly, around 20 knots. Still some gusts to near low end gale force, Stevens Passage through Lynn Canal, waves 3-4 feet there. Still upwards of 15 feet there, entering into Metlakatla and Ketchikan. Off the west coast in the nearshore waters, still some gusts of 45 knots there in the vicinity of Craig, but waves will come down considerably, more likely around 15 feet or so on Tuesday. For the northwestern Gulf, relatively quiet Christmas Day. We have variable winds around 10 knots off of the Seward coastline. Here in Prince William Sound, west winds 10 knots, 2-foot waves, and then across Cook Inlet, winds north in the upper end at 10 knots, but kind of mixed variable, probably more northwesterly there at the entrance of Cook Inlet, 20 knots with 3-foot waves. And then for Tuesday, got another little low that's going to be approaching from the southwest, so ahead of it, we expect winds to turn northeasterly to 15 knots within Prince William Sound, 3-foot waves. And then generally along the length of Cook Inlet, northeast winds, but they'll increase to 35-knot gales, especially there just west of Anchor Point down to Kamishak Bay, just outside of there, with waves building back up to about 10 to 11 feet. For Kodiak Island, west-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots on Christmas Day. Winds as we go down the length of the peninsula. On the Bering side, northeast, 15 to 20 knots. On the Pacific side, look for generally southwest winds around 25 knots with waves 8 to 10 feet there off of Sand Point and Chignik. And then Tuesday, winds will be southwest 25 to 30 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. And those winds northwesterly within Bristol Bay, more westerly off of Chignik and Sand Point. Coming southwesterly at 20 knots there around Cold Bay and False Passes. For the length of the Aleutians, the eastern Aleutians will see north winds around 20 knots, shifting back toward the northwest 25 to 30 knots. Once you get from around Atka and Adak westward, waves generally 6 to 9 feet in through the eastern half of the Aleutians, 7 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side. And then across a fair portion of the Aleutians, we're looking at generally west winds around 25 knots on Tuesday and waves running 8 to 10 feet there in the lower Bering and 7 to 10 feet there on the North Pacific. Across the southwest coast, we have the ice that's building in Bristol Bay and especially Kuskokwim Bay. Winds are going to be northerly out of Bristol Bay, southeasterly within Kuskokwim Bay, kind of a mixed bag, 15 to 20 knots, and then south winds along the outer Yukon coast up into Norton Sound, 15 to as high as 25 knots there once you get west of Hooper Bay and north of Nunavik Island. And for Tuesday, we have very cold air sitting up there in the morning across the southwest interior, so it's going to allow for more of an offshore flow, 20 to 25 knots out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta. Northeast wind 20 knots there out of Bristol Bay. And just the ice will continue to expand a bit west and southward there, especially vicinities of Nunavik Island westward. And then on Monday, Christmas Day, we expect through the Bering Strait, winds southerly through the strait, 20 knots, southeasterly, 20 to 25 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea, and then winds will come back around to the west-southwest around 10 knots along the Arctic coast from Utqiagvik on over toward Kaktovik. And for Tuesday, we anticipate those winds, west winds, 10 to as high as 20 knots in the vicinity of Kaktovik. And then as we drop down through the Chukchi Sea, winds will shift back toward the east out of Norton Sound. Once you get south of Point Hope, 15 to 20 knot winds, and then northeasterly winds 15, 20 knots through the Bering Strait, as high as 25 knots there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. So wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, and thank you again for being patient with us the other day.